Hey everybody, this is a piece titled Anti-Semitism, Spearhead of Universal Terror. It's from May 18th, 1943, and it's by Franz Neumann. Going to read from the German Wikipedia for Franz Neumann. In order to get a better picture. I believe he wrote this piece as working for the OSS, which is the Office of Strategic Services in the USA. So, here we go. The German Wikipedia says, Franz Neumann, who lived from 1900 to 1954, was a German-American political scientist and lawyer. Neumann came from an assimilated Jewish family from Katowice. As a student, Franz Neumann took part in the November Revolution of 1918-19 and joined the SPD. After completing his law doctorate under Max Ernst Mayr in Frankfurt am Main in 1923, Franz Neumann worked as a teacher at the trade union's own Academy of Labor from 1925 to 1927, and then as an assistant to Hugo Sinzheimer, the founder of German labor law. From 1928 to 1933, Franz Neumann worked in Berlin in partnership with Ernst Fraenkel and a lawyer specializing in labor law. Franz Neumann's clients included the German Building Trades Federation and the German Metal Workers Association, whom he represented in cases all the way to the Reich Labor Court in Leipzig. From 1928 onward, Franz Neumann taught at the German School of Politics in Berlin and worked as legal advisor to the SPD Executive Board. After the Nazis seized power, Franz Neumann was threatened and arrested in April 1933 as a Jew and opponent of National Socialism. In May 1933, Franz Neumann emigrated to England. There, Franz Neumann began studying political science and sociology at the London School of Economics and Political Science under Harold Laski and Karl Mannheim, completing his second doctorate in 1936. He was one of the first people to be expatriated by the new National Socialist government. In 1936, Franz Neumann moved to New York at the Institute for Social Research, which had been expelled from Frankfurt and was then affiliated with Columbia University. Franz Neumann worked alongside Theodor W. Adorno, Max Horkheimer, and Herbert Marcuse. During these years, he wrote on his main work, Behemoth, a structural analysis of National Socialism, and at the same time a pioneering work of power structure research. Not least because of the Institute's financial problems, Neumann moved to Washington, D.C. in 1942 to work for the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, where Franz Neumann worked for several years as a Germany expert and then as head of a scientific branch of the Germany Division of the State Department. Franz Neumann's work in the OSS consisted primarily of preparing the activities of the future military government in Germany. In collaboration with the American federal judge Robert H. Jackson and American chief prosecutor Telford Taylor, Neumann drafted several indictments for the Nuremberg trials. In 1946, Franz Neumann took part in them for the USA. Ian Buruma judges that Neumann was, quote, the most important mind behind denazification, end quote, in Germany. In 1948-50, Franz Neumann was appointed full professor of political science at Columbia University in New York. Franz Neumann helped found the Free University of Berlin and its Institute for Political Science, IFPW, later Otto Zur Institute. He also worked for a time as a visiting professor at the Free University of Berlin. In 1953, he was awarded an honorary doctorate by the Faculty of Philosophy. Neumann died in a car accident in Switzerland in 1954. Franz Neumann was the doctoral supervisor of Holocaust historian Raoul Hilberg. If you don't know who Raoul Hilberg is, he's a very, very important historian of the Holocaust. He's not just a historian, he's like one of the biggest historians. Franz Neumann's library was acquired by the University Library of the Free University of Berlin in 1954-55. New section, meaning. Together with Ernst Fraenkel and Karl Löwenstein, Neumann is considered one of the founders of political science in the Federal Republic of Germany. Neumann's reputation is based not least on his theory of totalitarianism, which he developed at about the same time as those of Hannah Arendt. Ernst Fraenkel and Karl J. Friedrich. Franz Neumann's guiding concept of totalitarian monopoly capitalism was indebted to the insights of the Frankfurt School with regard to the general trend towards bureaucratization of society. At the same time, Neumann also conducted independent political, sociological, and empirical studies. For example, Franz Neumann hoped that a systematic analysis of the Nuremberg follow-up trials would make an important contribution, quote, to contribute a great deal towards preventing in the future circumventions and violations similar to those which occurred after Versailles, end quote. Reception. Since the 1980s, the reception of his work has benefited from its classification as part of critical theory and was considered its most political and legal theoretical implementation. Jürgen Habermas referred to Franz Neumann in the late 1950s. The essay, The Functional Transformation of the Law in the Law of Civil Society, became a classic of materialist legal theory during the student movement. Ian Kershaw placed a quote from Franz Neumann at the beginning of his biography of Adolf Hitler. His books include Legal Philosophical Introduction to a Treatise on the Relationship Between State and Punishment, it was a dissertation from 1923, Collective Bargaining Law based on the case law of the Reich Labor Court, 1931, Freedom of Association in the Reich Constitution, 1932, The Functional Change of the Law and the Law of Civil Society, in Journal of Social Research, 1937, Democratic and Authoritarian State Studies and Political Theory, which was published in 1967, so after he died. Behemoth, Structure and Practice of National Socialism, 1933 to 1944. It says 1984, but I'm pretty sure that book was published before then. Economy, State, Democracy, which was published or republished in 1997. And with Karl August Betterman and Hans Karl Neprede, The Basic Rights, published 1966, and Rule of Law, published 1998. So, that's a little bit about Franz Neumann, and now I think we can start reading the text. Which again is titled Anti-Semitism, Spearhead of Universal Terror. This text was published in the internal newsletter of the OSS's. Sorry, where am I? One second. This text was published in the internal newsletter of the OSS's Research and Analysis Branch, Psychological Warfare Weekly Roundup, on the 9th of May, number 9, May 18th to May 24th, 1943, Section 2. Neumann's authorship is explicitly indicated on page 17. Classification, secret. So, the Office of Strategic Services was the intelligence agency of the United States during World War II. The Office of Strategic Services was formed as an agency of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to coordinate espionage activities behind enemy lines for all branches of the United States Armed Forces. Other Office of Strategic Services functions included the use of propaganda, subversion, and post-war planning. The Office of Strategic Services was dissolved a month after the end of the war. Intelligence tasks were shortly later resumed and carried over by its successors, the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research, and the Independent Central Intelligence Agency, CIA. On December 14, 2016, the organization was collectively honored with the Congressional Gold Medal. Now we can start. In one of the recent issues of Das Reich, Dr. Goebbels pledges the extermination of the Jews in the East. The Völkischer Beobachter in a recent issue, equally threatens the complete extermination of the Jews in Poland. The New York Herald Tribune on the 15th of May 1943 reports the complete liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto, and a large number of reports indicate the threats are being realized. Das Reich was a weekly newspaper founded by Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister of Nazi Germany, in May 1940. It was published by Deutscher Verlag. The contents of the paper were news reports, essays on various subjects, book reviews, and an editorial written by Goebbels. Some of the content was written by foreign authors. With the exception of Goebbels' editorial, Das Reich did not share the tone of other Nazi publications. Among other topics, Das Reich covered this uncertain casualty list from Stalingrad, distinguished between German and Allied invasions to suggest the latter would be unsuccessful, discussed the bombing raids and the V1, deplored American culture, portrays American morale as poor, though not suggesting they would give up because of it, and finally declared that Berlin would fight to the end. Goebbels' editorials covered a wide range of topics. Goebbels first bragged of the accomplishments of Nazi Germany, which was then conquering France. Goebbels spoke with continuing confidence as France fell of the opportunities the, quote, plutocracies, end quote, had missed for peace. Goebbels issued vitriolic anti-Semitic articles, argued against listening to enemy propaganda, encouraged them for total war, declared England bound to lose the war, attacked the still neutral United States, discussed the significance of its entry into the war, talked about prospects for a new year, presented German radio as a good companion when in fact he hoped to lure them from enemy propaganda broadcasts, professed to be delighted that Churchill was in command in Britain, discussed cuts in food rations and severe treatment for black market dealings, urged that complaints not get in the way of the war effort, accused Douglas MacArthur of cowardice, ineffectually as the Germans knew he had been ordered to believe, talked of the Allied bombing, discussed the sinking of Allied ships by German U-boats, explained Soviet resistance in Sevastopol as a product of stubborn but bestial Russian soul, decried the United States as having no culture, urged that Germans not allow their sense of justice to be exploited by their enemies, and claimed that the Allies were as weary as the Axis. His final article in April 1945 called for last-ditch resistance. The Völkischer Beobachter was the newspaper of the Nazi Party from the 25th of December 1920. It first appeared weekly, then daily from the 8th of February 1923. For 24 years it formed part of the official public face of the Nazi Party until its last edition at the end of April 1945. The paper was banned and ceased publication between November 1932, after Adolf Hitler's arrest for leading the unsuccessful beer hall putsch in Munich, and February 1925, the approximate date of the relaunching of the party. So, there we are. Back to the text. 1. This most recent stage in the long process of the extermination of the Jews makes it mandatory to re-examine the function of anti-Semitism within the framework of the Nazi system. Anti-Semitism has been from the very foundation of the Nazi Party the most constant single ideology of the Nazi Party. No other element has so constantly figured in the forefront of Nazi ideologies and Nazi activities. We may indeed say that anti-Semitism is the sole ideology that can possibly cement the Nazi Party, and it is this unique function of anti-Semitism which gives it its peculiar character. Notice the distinction between this characterization of Nazism, which doesn't reduce Nazism to fascism, which may or may not have anti-Semitism as its as core of its ideology. In the case of Italy, I believe, that was not the case. And notice the distinction between this and like a lot of Marxist theoretician, even like Trotsky, who's more observant than a lot of other people, and probably a lot of other people on the left in general, did not really take anti-Semitism and its ideological function in the Nazis particularly seriously. They thought it was just like kind of like a rallying call it was kind of like a publicity stunt or something like that for the realization. I mean, to my understanding, maybe I'm talking out my ass, but to my understanding, it was like they viewed anti-Semitism more as like a to whip up popular sentiment for like imperial expansion and a form of like, you know, sort of kind of like super capitalism or something like that. The understanding of anti-Semitism is impaired by the widely accepted scapegoat theory, according to which the Jews are used as scapegoats for all evils of society. The slaughter or the expulsion of the scapegoat, however, marks in mythology the end of a process, while the persecution of the Jews as practiced by National Socialists is only the prologue of more horrible things to come. The expropriation of the Jews, for instance, is followed by that of the Poles, Czechs, Dutchmen, Frenchmen, anti-Nazi Germans, and middle classes. Not only Jews are put in concentration camps, but pacifists, conservatives, socialists, Catholics, Protestants, freethinkers, and members of the occupied peoples. Not only Jews fall under the executioner's axe, but countless others of many races, nationalities, beliefs, and religions. Anti-Semitism is thus the spearhead of terror. The Jews are used as guinea pigs in testing a method of repression. It is, however, only the Jews who can possibly play this role. National Socialism, which has allegedly abolished the class struggle, needs an enemy who, by his very existence, can integrate the antagonistic groups within this society. This foe must not be too weak. If he were too weak, one could not justify in the eyes of the peoples to make him the supreme foe. He must clearly not be too strong, because otherwise the Nazis would become involved in a serious struggle with a powerful enemy. It is for this reason that the Catholic Church has not been raised to the rank of the supreme foe. It is the Jews who admirably fill the role of being neither too strong nor too weak. I'm, again, talking out my ass, but I believe that, you know, well, for one, like, large parts of what would be, like, the greater German population of Europe is Catholic, so that would not work as a scapegoat. And two, I think a key part of like the notion of like, you know, Goebbels' a sense of like true socialism, of like the Volksgemeinschaft, of like the people's community, tried to have a cohesion under like the notion of like a German community, or not cohesion, but a tolerance within the German community between Catholics and Protestants, right? That's what I believe that was like their kind of rationale. I mean, like, I don't think that persecuting the Catholic Church would have gone over particularly well in Austria or southern Germany. I believe that's where a lot of yeah, it says 53% of Austrians are Roman Catholics. So that probably wouldn't, like, persecuting the Catholic Church probably would not have been particularly popular amongst the community, the national community that the Nazis were trying to build. It follows that in this anti-Semitic ideology and practice, the extermination of the Jews is only the means to the attainment of the ultimate objective, namely the destruction of free institutions, beliefs, and groups. We may call this theory of anti-Semitism the spearhead theory of anti-Semitism. Section 2. While anti-Semitism has thus been a constant and consistent policy of National Socialism, anti-Semitism's manifestations have changed considerably from 1933 to 1943. It is these changes in anti-Semitic policies which allow us to gain an insight not so much in the fate of the Jews, but rather in the structure of the Nazi system. The first manifestation of all-out anti-Semitism was April 1st, 1933, the day of the anti-Jewish boycott. Where am I? Sorry, I lost my spot. There's a footnote, but I don't see what the footnote's attached to, so I can't. I don't think that the footnote is in the text. This period of anti-Semitism may be called the SA anti-Semitism. At that time, it was the lower middle classes, the scum of the proletariat, and many professionals, lawyers, doctors, who either actively participated in or at least rejoiced at this outburst of anti-Semitic activity. It is known that the boycott was prematurely broken off at the insistence of Schacht. I think it's Hjalmar Schacht was his name, and of the Anglo-American powers, and that the economic disadvantages resulting from this anti-Semitism far outweighed the advantages accruing from the satisfaction of basic instincts. It is thus the regard for public opinion and the hope of economic collaboration with England and America which prevented the outbreak of a full-fledged Jewish persecution in 1933. The Nazis had tested foreign opinion, found it unfavorable, and abandoned their attempt. 3. The succeeding period up to November 1938 is one of a cold, calculated, legalized persecution of Jews in Germany, a step-by-step enactment of anti-Jewish legislation. The situation changed in November 1938, when under the impact of the assassination of Vom Rath, a pogrom was staged and the complete exclusion of the Jews from German economic and social life was carried out. Wikipedia says Ernst vom Rath was a member of the German nobility, a Nazi party member, and German Foreign Office diplomat. Ernst vom Rath is mainly remembered for his assassination in Paris in 1938 by a Polish Jewish teenager, Herschel Greenspan, which provided a pretext for Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass. Historians consider Kristallnacht the beginning of the Holocaust. On his assassination, it says, on the morning of the 7th of November 1938, Polish-German Jew Herschel Greenspan, 17, went to the German embassy in Paris and asked to speak with an embassy official. After he had learned of the deportation of his parents from Germany to the Polish frontier, Greenspan shot Ernst vom Rath, the third secretary of the German embassy in Paris. He shot the 29-year-old vom Rath 5 times, mortally wounding him with bullets to the spleen, stomach, and pancreas. Adolf Hitler himself sent his 2 best doctors, personal physician Karl Brandt and surgeon George Magnus, to Paris to save vom Rath's life. Hitler promoted vom Rath, who had been a juror at the embassy, to the rank of legal consul, first class, Gesandtschaftsrat, first Klasse, hours before vom Rath's death on the 9th of November at 17:30 or 5:30 p.m. Kristallnacht was launched within hours. Why Greenspan, who had fled from Germany to France in 1938, chose vom Rath is not known with certainty, though Greenspan was upset over the news that his family was being deported from Germany back to Poland. As far as it can be established, Greenspan and Rath did not know each other. Most accounts of the shooting state that Greenspan did not ask for vom Rath by name, but only asked to speak to a member of the diplomatic staff. The records were falsified in 1942, and the Germans spread propaganda that Greenspan's intention was to kill the Nazi ambassador, Count Johannes von Weltschek. Greenspan, who was immediately arrested and confessed, insisted his motives were to avenge Jewish people for the actions taken by the Germans. He had a postcard on him written to his parents that read, quote, "With God's help, dear parents, I could not do otherwise. May God forgive me. The heart bleeds when I hear of your tragedy and that of the 12,000 Jews. I must protest so that the whole world hears my protest, and that I will do. Forgive me," end quote. So back to the text. The situation changed in November 1938 when, under the impact of the assassination of Vom Rath, a pogrom was staged, and the complete exclusion of the Jews from German economic and social life was carried out. To understand the anti-Jewish activities during this period, it was necessary to find out whether or not the pogrom was a spontaneous popular reaction or a skillfully organized and manipulated maneuver. Each and every correspondent who had occasion to observe the pogrom agrees that there was no spontaneity in the anti-Semitic manifestations. Every single report that has since come out of Germany affirms the view that spontaneous anti-Semitism is unknown in Germany today, and that anti-Semitic manifestations are manipulated from above. There's a second factor which supports this thesis. The anti-Semitic legislation of November and December 1938, which excluded the Jews from economic life, was carefully prepared in advance. A decree of the 26th, 1938 had already compelled the Jews to, quote, register and evaluate their total domestic and foreign properties, end quote, and an executive decree of the same date forbade them to acquire any industrial, agrarian, or forestry enterprise. Wikipedia says on the 26th of April 1938, Nazi Germany enacted the Order for the Disclosure of Jewish Assets, requiring Jews to report all property in excess of 5,000 Reichsmarks. Back to the text. The fact that as early as the spring of 1938 registration of Jewish property was ordered makes it clear that the decrees of November and December 1938 were planned long in advance, and that the death of Vom Rath merely served as a pretext for unleashing the concentrated fury of the regime. There still remains the question why the period between the spring of 1938 and December 1938 was chosen for the enactment of the radical anti-Jewish legislation. On February 4th, 1938, Hitler assumed the Supreme Army Command. Wikipedia says, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht was established in Nazi Germany by decree, putting Hitler himself in complete control of the military with Wilhelm Keitel as nominal commander-in-chief. The new command structure abolished the position of war minister, and 12 senior generals were sent into retirement. The German public was still unaware of the Blomberg-Fritsch affair and wondered if the changes were the result of some kind of failed internal coup attempt. Back to the text. On March 13th, 1938, Austria was united with Germany. Anschluss. How do you say that? On May 20th, 1938, the construction of the Western Wall was started. On September 12, 1938, at the Party Conference at Nuremberg, Hitler initiated the destruction of Czechoslovakia. On September 12, 1930, the year 1930 is thus the year in which, for the first time, the power of resistance of the democracies against Nazi Germany was put to the most severe test. It is in this connection that the radical anti-Semitic legislation must be understood. But there is a second consideration. Early in 1939, the two decrees for the combing out of handicraft and retail were enacted, and the government thus, for the first time officially, proclaimed the exclusion of considerable sectors of the middle classes from an independent economic existence. The economic exclusion of the Jews had thus been merely a prologue of the blow directed against the independent middle class. Five, The physical extermination of the Jews of the spring of 1943 takes place in similar circumstances. The Labor Mobilization Act of January 27, 1943, has again deprived hundreds of thousands of middle-class men of their independence. The political situation is as difficult as it can possibly be imagined. The antagonisms within German society earnestly concealed by an all-comprehensive terrorist machine. The denunciation of Bolshevism, socialism, democracy, liberalism, capitalism is Jewish, together with the planned extermination of the Jews, has the following functions. Quote, not quote, it's indented, so I said quote, but it's not a quote. 1. Dr. Werner Best has, in 1942, clearly defined the function of anti-Semitism for consumption abroad. A country, he said, that surrenders to anti-Semitism has thereby already surrendered its liberal tradition. It has thus abandoned its bulwark against totalitarianism and is on its way to becoming a totalitarian society. Wikipedia says Karl Rudolf Werner Best was a German jurist, police chief, SS Obergruppenführer, Nazi Party leader, and theoretician from Darmstadt. Werner Best was the first chief of the Department 1 of the Gestapo, Nazi Germany's secret police, and initiated a registry of all Jews in Germany. As a deputy of SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, he organized the World War II SS Einsatzgruppen, paramilitary death squads that carried out mass murder in Nazi-occupied territories. Werner Best served in the German military occupation administration of France from 1940 to 1942, and then became the civilian administrator of occupied Denmark 1942 to 1945. Convicted of war crimes in Denmark, Werner Best was released from prison in 1951. Following its release, Werner Best campaigned for an amnesty for Nazi war criminals and against the abolition of the statute of limitations. Werner Best escaped further prosecution in West Germany in 1972 due to ill health and died in 1989, aged 85. Back to the text. 2. Domestically, anti-Semitism is still the testing ground for universal terrorist methods directed against all groups and institutions that are not fully subservient to the Nazi system. 3. Persecution of the Jews, which is practiced at the order of the Nazis by ever larger strata of the German people, involves these strata in a collective guilt. The compulsion to commit so vast a crime as the physical extermination of Eastern Jews makes the German army, the civil service, and large masses perpetrators and accessories in the crime, and makes it therefore impossible for them to leave the Nazi boat. It is, I believe, safe to assume that a new wave of anti-Semitism is also intended to make separate peace negotiations by non-Nazi members of the ruling class impossible. The Nazis want them, each and every one of them, to be stained by the crime that is now being committed. Use. The above remarks must prevent us from making anti-propaganda. It would be futile to refute the anti-Semitic propaganda of the Nazis, since this propaganda is probably not believed. It would be dangerous to praise the Jews for their contributions to civilization or for their patriotic attitude for their anti-Nazi activities. Anti-Semitic propaganda should be treated as has been indicated above. The end. Thank you for listening. Thank you for listening to me look things up. I appreciate it, and thanks for listening.